Hello everybody. Don't worry about reading this article. You may see it here, but don't worry about that one. Don't worry about this slide here because the next one, this slide's for my other classes, but not my online. Okay, so as you can see here, I've listed the top government spending programs. As you can see, the highest one, when we break them down, is Social Security, which is basically a retirement plan that was set up during the Great Depression to help out the elderly. And so as you can see here, it's our national government's largest expenditure. Okay, in 1975, you can see Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security made up a quarter of the federal budget. In 2012, it was 43% of the entire budget. So these three programs are eating up a large portion of our federal budget. Okay, something very important to understand, that these programs are typically seen as very sacred politically, and politicians are reluctant to do much to them because they're concerned about political backlash, because Medicare and Social Security are mostly for the elderly. So why do we study this? You pay into the system. If you look at your paycheck, you will see a line item taken out of your check. It may be called FICA or OASDI, and you pay around a 6.2% tax into Social Security, and then your employer matches your amount too. You may also have loved ones who are on the system in the future, and to also help you understand the future problems that will happen to Social Security. And my concern for students is that when many students are in their working lives and have responsibilities and obligations of their own, this is when some of the problems could occur. So my idea is to kind of give you a heads up before this starts really occurring. So as you can see here, lastly, 18% of all income in the U.S. was government assistance, and only 51% of all income came from actual wages. So there's an ugly reality for a lot of people, okay? Nearly half of the people who are retired had to leave work early due to either health or layoffs, okay? So that probably means about 10 or 20, or 10 people out of 20 in a class would have to leave work early due to health reasons, or they get laid off and find it hard to get a job. And as you can see, some other problems here that people are facing. 60% of the workers have less than $25,000 in any kind of savings. Any kind of savings, okay? And then 55% of the retirees have less than $25,000 in any kind of savings. So Americans are having a hard time saving for retirement, but also even the current retirees don't have a lot of money. So more and more people are dependent on Social Security. So as you can also see, some problems for future retirees. Okay, 23% of families have more debt on credit cards, student loans, medical bills, and other unsecured debt than they have in savings, and that number has gone up since 2009. And another big problem is more than 1 in 4 American workers have used some of their retirement money to pay current expenses. And so that's a problem, because a lot of people are having to tap into money that they've managed to save up to pay current expenses. So the point being here, a lot of people are having a hard time saving for their retirement because of expenses now. So why did we set up Social Security? Well, it was 3 reasons. Number one, to help the elderly population, help survivors of deceased workers, and help disabled workers. Social Security was created in the 1930s during the Roosevelt presidency to help out those 3 groups of people who didn't have really any source of social support during the Great Depression. Social Security is very important for a lot of people today. As you can see, the 2 stats there. It's It's over half the income for 57% of the families and 90% of the income for 30% of the families. So the people who use Social Security are dependent on it as a source of their income, or as a large part of their income. Then we take a look at poverty among the elderly in Missouri. Okay, today we have around 70,000 Missourians 65 and older who live on $10,000 a year. Jefferson County itself has 4,400 people 65 and older who live on $10,000 a year or less. Okay, Jefferson County, Missouri has around 220,000 people roughly. So we have a pretty sizable population of poor elderly folks living in the county. Okay, so this is some pretty tough facts to look at here when it comes to retirement and getting older. We're also going to experience what is called a tidal wave of gray. As you can see that by 2050, 1 in 5 people will be 65 and older. And that has a lot of dimensions to it because of politics will change too, because politicians will focus more on elderly issues because of the large amount of population. Okay? Right now, or in 2010, around 53 million people got Social Security. But we fast forward 20 years into the future, and there will be 93 million people who will receive Social Security in 2035. That's a big jump in the number of people on the system. And if you're just wondering, that CBO means Congressional Budget Office statistics. Okay? The world will also have a lot of elderly people, 80 and older. In some countries, such as Iran, have been offering incentives to encourage people to have more children. Okay, so you can see some of the things the Iranians are doing to try and increase the number of children being born. So how is Social Security funded? You pay 6.2% of your income, and your employer matches it. But if you're self-employed, you have to pay both halves. Keep this in mind too. Only the first $117,000 of your pay is taxed for Social Security purposes. If you make $500,000 a year, you only pay Social Security taxes on the first $117,000. And then some Social Security recipients pay income tax on their benefits as well. That depends on the income threshold set by Congress. So as we can look at for Social Security, the ratio of workers to beneficiaries. So in 1950, you had 16 workers for every 1 recipient. By 1960, it had dropped to 5 to 1. And then look at it for the future. In 2020, 2.3 to 1, and by 2035, it's estimated it will be 2 workers for every 1 retiree. So that's going to put a burden on those who are working to try and help take care of those retirees. So as you can see, it was a lot easier in 1950 to take care of 1 retiree versus what it will be in 2035. I know it's hard to believe that, folks, thinking about 2035, but just imagine how old you'll be in 2035. Just add about 20 years onto your age and imagine at what point you'll be in your life with kids and, dealing with elderly parents. So this is why this issue is important. So how did we set this system up? We borrowed a system that the Germans had set up in the 1890s. Okay? In 1935, Congress passed a law that set up a Social Security system for those folks. It was originally run by a 3-person board appointed by the president, and presidents after Roosevelt would appoint people to that board when an opening came up. 1937, the first payments were made. Then there's a term I want to introduce to y'all called a cost of living adjustment. In 1949, President Truman from Missouri increased benefits of Social Security by 77%. From when the time the first payments were made in 1937 to 1949, there wasn't an increase in the amount of money. So if you got $100 in 1937 in Social Security, and then in 1949 you were still getting $100 in Social Security. So as you know, that $100 in 1937 went a lot further than what it would have in 1949. You can also see the fertility rate in the United States. In 1957, it was 3.7 children. Then we had a big drop in 1976 to 1.7, and today we're at about 2.07. Then also Eisenhower, his administration in the 1950s, made self-employed people pay into Social Security, and he increased benefits as well. So then in the 1960s, President Johnson and his plan, the Great Society, expanded the responsibilities of Social Security, where they would cover hospital and nursing home care. So as Social Security as a program evolves, it took on more responsibilities. In 1968, there was a 13% increase in the benefits paid to Social Security recipients. In the 1970s, Congress enacted what was called automatic cost of living adjustments. Okay? And so basically, when inflation would rise, the law was so would Social Security payments. And so that pretty much was the way it was from 1972 to 2009. But in 2009 and 10, inflation actually decreased, so recipients didn't get an increase in that year. But as you can see in 2011 and 2012, Social Security recipients got a little bit of an increase. In 1977, the federal government created the SSI program to handle payments to those who were disabled. In the 1980s, there was a short-term crisis in October of '83, so Ronald Reagan, who was president at the time, created the Greenspan Commission, and it increased the age limit to 67 for people who were born after 1960. Basically, you have to be 67 to get full Social Security if you were born after 1960. Then they also agreed to tax the benefits of wealthy recipients. In 1989, Congress passed a law where citizens were supposed to get a Social Security statement annually. And the idea behind this was to help people plan and get an idea of what they would make in Social Security if they became disabled or once they started drawing Social Security because of their age. So in 1989, the idea was to help people start planning plan their benefits for Social Security, to have an idea of what they're going to get in the hope that people would plan. Bad timing. Sorry about that. President Bush was a victim of bad timing because in 2000 and 2001, the stock market began to decline after 9/11, and then because of some corporate scandals, people lost faith in the market. So what happened was people eventually were scared because of that idea of investing money for Social Security in the stock market. So a lot of people were scared, and Bush's plan didn't really go anywhere. So what are the current status? As you can kind of take a look here, in 2009, 53 million people were beneficiaries. And as you can see, 36 million were retired workers, 6 million were survivors of deceased workers, and 10 million were disabled workers and their dependents. And as you can also see the amount from 2013, 40 million retirees. A lot of those folks are the baby boom generation born after World War II who are starting to retire en masse. And the number of survivors of deceased workers is around 6 million. And those who are disabled workers and their dependents are at about $11 million. Or 11 million people, I'm sorry. Okay? So as you can see, the vast majority of new people on Social Security are the elderly in 2013. So here's what we're looking at here when it comes to Social Security and its current status. Around 156 million people pay into Social Security. Okay? Just to give you an idea of some of the cost here, in 2007, $686 billion was paid into Social Security. Or $686 billion was paid out, and the government took in about $807 billion. And the idea was that the government would put that money up. And so right now the Social Security has kind of what you might think of it as money it's owed, which is equal to about $2.5 trillion from the government. Okay? And so this is good that Social Security has some money put up for the future. So one thing that's very important for the United States and for us to understand is that Americans are living longer, as you can see here by the chart, which means they're going to be on Social Security for longer as well, which means they'll draw more money for Social Security. Okay? And then at the bottom of the screen you can kind of see some of the adjustments, what they got, what Social Security recipients got in 2007 and 2008. Now, something very important to understand. The Social Security has money that is expected to become exhausted in 2033 and 34. Okay? And this is kind of that money that Social Security has saved up. But the big concern when it comes to that trust fund is, how long is it going to last? Because around 2018, we're going to have to start permanently using the trust fund to make payments to current recipients. Because the number of workers just won't bring in enough money to pay the current recipients. So they expect the trust fund to become exhausted around 2033 or 34. And folks, this is bad news for us because several years ago when I first started teaching about Social Security, that number was 2037. And because of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, that number dropped by 3 years. So that's why, economic times can hurt Social Security and its trust fund. Okay? So in 2033 or 34 is when the trust fund is supposed to be exhausted. Because between 2018 and 2034, there just won't be enough money coming into Social Security. So they'll have to use some of that savings to pay current beneficiaries what they're supposed to get. And so as you can see here in 2008, the number of applications for Social Security went up by 23% in the year 2008 alone. And that was due to baby boomers retiring and older workers who had lost jobs in 2008, 2009. Okay, so as you can take a look here at other things, the government has set up a special program called the Pension Benefit Guarantee Fund in 1974 to help people who worked and received a pension from a company that had collapsed. And so the government set that fund up, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Fund. And in 2012, the Pension Benefit Guarantee Fund ran a $34 billion deficit. So that means the taxpayers were having to pick up an extra $34 billion to help pay those pensions that retirees of companies would, to pay retirees of companies. Otherwise, the concern was we would have a lot of elderly folks losing their pension and being in a lot worse shape. Then we also have state funds that are in trouble as well. A good example of that is Illinois. Okay, so you can take a look at and try and think about what are some of the problems and some of the solutions. As far as problems go, people are living longer, which costs Social Security more. You have a lot more people retiring over the next 20 years, the baby boom generation. Okay, so those are some of the long-term problems facing Social Security. So we'll take a look at some of the solutions in a few minutes. Okay? Now, this study was done by the Congressional Budget Office. If they increase the taxes on the employee and the employer, what would it do to the Social Security Trust Fund? So as you can see, if they raised it by 0.5% or by 1% for the employee and the employer. Okay? And then also keep in mind about raising the income, the maximum amount of income. Okay, it used to be $106,000 a couple of years ago. Now it's $117,000. Some other possible changes or ideas that have been tossed about are raising the retirement age or cutting back benefits. But those will be very difficult to achieve politically because, keep in mind, the elderly are the largest voting bloc in this country. And so politicians would be very, very nervous if they have to start talking about raising the retirement age or cutting benefits for Social Security workers. So they would have to be very careful before they cut benefits to recipients of Social Security or raise the retirement age. Okay. And then there was another study done by the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which President Obama created. And these were the ideas that Simpson and Bowles came up with. Simpson was a former Republican senator, and Bowles was a former Democratic senator. And so he appointed these two guys to try and come up with some ideas. Okay? And so as you can see, these were Simpson and Bowles' ideas, was to slowly raise the income, the taxable amount of income, slowly raise the retirement age, and cut benefits to middle and upper income residents, and then kind of make a guarantee payment for all recipients at 125% of the poverty level. So as you can see, the average payment per person is $15,000. Okay? So there have been some ideas out there, but the hard part of it is who's willing, what politicians are willing to take that chance to tinker with the Social Security program. That's the hard part. It's easy in theory to talk about cutting and raising the age. It's another one when you actually have to cast the actual vote to do that. Okay? As you can look and see on this slide, Americans have a favorable perception of Social Security, and it's important to a lot of people. The older you get, the more important it becomes. Just look at the difference between 18 and 34-year-olds versus those between 35 and 64. It becomes a lot more important because the longer you work, the longer you pay in, so you want to make sure that system is still there for you when you retire. Okay? So, but as you can see at the very top, Americans are somewhat a majority in favor of raising taxes or the age of retirement to save Social Security, because it is a popular program among the elderly or those who are soon to be elderly. Okay, here's some practice questions for you here. Which of the following term best describes people born between 65 and 74? The correct answer to that one is Generation X. Generation X was the group of Americans who were born right after the baby boom generation. There were a lot more baby boomers than there were Generation Xers. And so that's kind of one of the big concerns for Social Security, because you have a lot more baby boomers than Generation X. Okay, the fertility rate in 1957 was around blank, while the fertility rate was around what in 1976. This one was on one of the slides that we covered. So take a look at your responses here. Okay, the correct answer is D. In 1957 it was 3.6, and in 1976 it was 1.7. So that's kind of the difference between the 3.6 is the baby boom generation and the 1.7 is Generation X. Alrighty everybody, that's all the lecture notes from Social Security. And don't forget to take the quiz. But don't forget to look over these notes if you got any questions or anything like that. Have a good day.